Kodak Black is facing backlash after turning down Young Thug's offer to join YSL. Following his label split, Thug publicly reached out with a massive deal, but Kodak's response left fans stunned. Keep watching because the exact words he used against Thug are far worse than anyone expected. So, here's the scene. Young Thug has just survived one of the most exhausting legal battles in the history of American hip-hop. Years in Fulton County Jail, a RICO indictment that swallowed up dozens of people. Co-defendants flipping, lawyers getting arrested mid-trial, and somewhere in the chaos of all that, Thug still found a way to walk out with his label, his name, and his ambition intact. The moment he gets free air under his feet, he doesn't slow down. He hops on a Twitch stream with Plaque with Boymax. He starts talking about building YSL back up. He starts naming artists he wants, and one name he throws out publicly stops the whole internet cold. Kodak Black. Young Thug jumped on social media to let the world know he'd give practically anything to have Kodak sign a recording contract with YSL Records. He was reposting an announcement that Kodak had just become independent after ending his deal with Capitol Records, and Thug wrote that if Kodak would do a deal with him, he'd give that boy whatever he thought he wanted. Just read that back for a second. Whatever he thinks he wants. That's not a negotiation. That's not sliding the DMs. Let's figure out numbers. That's a man with a freshly rebuilt label, flush off his freedom, putting himself on the table completely in front of everyone. Kodak's new album, Kodak the Blessing, had been his final project with Capitol Records, which meant he was now fully independent. No label overhead, no executive interference. Just Yak, his music, and his own terms for the first time in his career. And that's exactly the context Thug is working with when he makes this move. He's not recruiting a broke, desperate artist who needs a lifeline. He's going after a man who just tasted freedom, artistic freedom, business freedom, and trying to pull him back into a label structure, a YSL label structure no less. If Kodak had joined YSL, he'd have been joining a roster that included Strick, Young K.O., 1300 Saint, Tez Diamond, and Thug himself, a label that had previously signed Gunna, Lil Baby, Nine Vicious, and Lil Keed. That pedigree is real. That history is real. But Kodak Black didn't take the offer. He didn't just decline quietly, either. He didn't give a polite, "I'm focused on being independent right now." Appreciate the love. He did what Kodak Black does. He said what was on his mind. He said it loud, and he made sure there was no ambiguity about where he stood on Young Thug's situation as a whole. Kodak and Boosie Badazz were beefing over the Young Thug snitching debate, and all the Atlanta fallout, and the core of it was that Kodak felt Boosie wasn't holding Thug accountable, which he saw as hypocritical given Boosie's history of going hard at 69 for similar accusations. That's where the story starts to get laid, because Kodak wasn't just rejecting a business offer. He was rejecting a man whose reputation, in his eyes, had been compromised, and he had the nerve to say so publicly while Thug was still trying to rebuild. The confrontation kicked off when Kodak questioned Boosie's conspicuous silence about Young Thug's ongoing RICO proceedings. Taking to Instagram, the Florida rapper challenged what he saw as hypocrisy from someone known for speaking out on hip-hop controversies. Basically, Kodak's message to Boosie was, "You were the loudest voice in the room when 69 was getting dragged. You had a whole platform built on calling out snitches. So, where are you now that Thug's name is in these streets getting muddy the same way? Where's that energy?" Kodak's pointed. Criticism suggested that Boosie, typically vocal about industry injustices, had abandoned his advocacy role when it mattered most. The post contained inflammatory language directed at a Louisiana native, questioning his commitment to supporting fellow artists facing legal persecution. Boosie didn't let it sit. He came right back. He wasted no time clapping back with a heated post on X, dismissing Kodak's criticisms while making it clear that money is a deciding factor in whether or not he addresses Thug's situation. His logic was simple and honestly kind of ruthless. He gets paid to speak on situations, and until somebody brings a bag, it's not his problem to carry Thug's water publicly. He also accused Kodak of harboring resentment over past remarks Boosie had made about Kodak, collaborating with Tekashi 699's name. So now we've got layers within layers. Kodak calling out Boosie for being silent on Thug. Boosie firing back that Kodak's just still salty over old beef. And Young Thug, the man who just offered a blank check, sitting right in the middle of all of it. The thing about this moment is that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. To understand why Kodak rejecting that deal meant what it meant and why the disrespect attached to it landed the way it did, you have to understand what Young Thug had just gone through to even be in a position to make that offer. The YSL Records racketeering trial was a criminal proceeding in Fulton County, Georgia, involving Young Thug and several associates from his record label. Prosecutors allege that YSL operated both as a legitimate record label and as a criminal street gang under Georgia's RICO laws. The trial began following the May 2022 indictment of 28 individuals associated with YSL. 28 people. That's not a drug case. That's not one rapper with some gun charges. That's an entire ecosystem. Artists, affiliates, family members, all swept up in something that the state of Georgia built a years-long case around. The trial became one of the longest and most expensive criminal trials in Georgia history. It featured 2 judicial recusals and the arrest of 2 defense attorneys. 2 defense attorneys arrested during the trial. That alone tells you how off the rails this whole thing went. Kodak Black's own attorney, Bradford Cohen, publicly called for mistrial after Young Thug's attorney, Brian Steele, was taken into custody and held in contempt during court proceedings because Steele had refused to give up a source after confronting the judge for allegedly meeting with a witness privately without proper counsel present. That's the world Thug was living in, and Kodak's lawyer was loud about how wrong it was. Young Thug ultimately accepted a plea deal in what became the longest criminal trial in Georgia history. But by the time that happened, the damage to the YSL world was already done. Co-defendants had flipped, friendships had shattered. Following Gunna's release, some fellow rappers and many people on social media felt that he had snitched on Thug by taking a plea deal to get out of jail. The fallout from those plea deals, the accusations, the debates, the public flogging of everyone connected to YSL, that's a backdrop to everything that happens next in Kodak Black's decision to not just reject Thug's offer, but to publicly question his street credibility at the same moment. That hits different when you understand the weight of what Thug had just survived. Now, let's be clear about something. Kodak Black has never been the type to keep his thoughts quiet just because it might cost him something. That's always been part of what makes him who he is and part of what keeps getting him into situations he didn't necessarily need to be in. Some fans supported Thug's proposition to bring Kodak into YSL, but many assume Kodak is happy being independent and clown Thug for trying to get him back in a label situation. The public reaction was mixed. Thug's fans thought it was a generous move. Kodak's fans thought it was almost a little insulting. Like, why would a man who just broke free from Capitol Records want to walk himself into another label situation? And that tension, that question of what Kodak actually values, what kind of freedom is actually chasing, becomes a through line of this entire story. Because the way Kodak responded didn't just say no, thank you. It said something much louder than that. It said, I see what's happening with you right now, and I'm not touching it. Young Thug was balancing on a thin line between public loyalty and private decisions, and whether he truly snitched or not almost didn't matter anymore. The perception was out there, and perception can be more damaging than reality. That perception is exactly what Kodak was responding to. He wasn't just turning down a record deal. He was distancing himself from a man whose reputation in the streets had taken a hit that no amount of interviews or Twitter posts could fully repair. Young Thug was in damage control mode. The first shot across the bow was a previously leaked 2015 interrogation of the Atlanta rapper. It had been seen as Thug trolling detectives when it first emerged, but now it was being portrayed as him collaborating with authorities during the RICO trial. This was soon followed by a steady stream of leaked jail calls where Thug speaks incredibly bluntly on friends and foes alike. The calls were everywhere, every day. Something new was dropping, and Kodak, watching all of this unfold, decided to weigh in. Not with sympathy for a peer, but with pointed questions about why people who normally bark loud were suddenly going quiet. That's the move that ignites everything else. Let's talk about what those leaked calls actually contained, because without them, none of this lands the way it does. The calls aren't just embarrassing audio. They are the fuel behind every argument, every subtweet, every pointed Instagram post that follows. They are the reason Kodak Black's rejection of Thug's deal carries a specific flavor it carries. Young Thug had been at the center of controversy as recordings of jailhouse calls made while he was incarcerated during the YSL trial leaked online. In those calls, he's heard speaking on his frustrations with everyone from Kendrick Lamar to Drake, and even Andre 3000, whom he alleges never put on other Atlanta artists, despite being viewed as a pioneer of the Atlanta rap scene. Elsewhere, he speculates on the reason behind Metro Boomin and Drake falling out. Artists you'd expect Thug to be cool with. Names that you'd assume, given Thug's position and influence in Atlanta music, would be off-limits. Gunna dragged in calls that were never supposed to see the light of day. The ordeal made for endless fodder on the rap internet and undoubtedly damaged Thug's reputation. Since the YSL trial started, Thug had lost friends and opportunities while incarcerated, while Gunna had become a pariah for many in the rap game. That last point, Gunna becoming a pariah, is important to sit with because Gunna didn't actually testify against Thug. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of racketeering and earned release on probation without testifying. Many people believe the plea indicated cooperation with authorities, though Gunna consistently denied this, stating he never testified, never identified anyone, and never acted against young Thug. During a public interview, Thug shed tears while discussing the friends he lost because of their cooperation. That's not performance. That's not media strategy. His raw emotion communicated that his feelings toward Gunna weren't mere street bluster, but pain that he didn't seem to know how to resolve. And then before the dust has even settled, before the public has had time to forget the trial, before the leaked calls have stopped dropping, he reaches out to Kodak Black publicly with an open check offer. Not quietly, publicly on social media. That move tells you something about how Thug was reading his own situation. He needed wins. He needed to show the world that YSL was still alive, still capable of pulling serious talent, still worth something after everything the RICO case had put it through. Following the end of the RICO case and entering fresh into 2025, Thug went on to sign Atlanta rapper Nine Vicious after months of co-signing him. That signing was meant to signal momentum, but Nine Vicious ended up being a complicated situation, too. After being affiliated with YSL for half of 2025, Vicious left the label after having mixed emotion from both parties. Upon his leave, he created his own clique, and later joined the Create Music Group. So, the Kodak Black offer isn't just a business pitch. It's a reach, a man rebuilding who sees a big name he can attach to, the resurrection story, and goes for it. He sees Kodak as free, as independent, as someone who could bring credibility and commercial heat back to YSL's name. And Kodak says no, but not just no. He says no while simultaneously going after people who aren't speaking up about what happened with young Thug's name in these streets. He's essentially positioning himself as someone who holds a line on accountability, which is a very specific kind of disrespect when the person you're rejecting is standing right there hoping you'll be his next signing. As fans debated loyalty, street codes, and who's really standing on business, Kodak managed to expose himself in the worst way. After attempting to drag Boosie into a social media war over snitching and loyalty, leaked audio showed he was the one not keeping it real. Because Boosie Badass is not a random figure in this story. He has been one of hip-hop's most visible voices on the topic of snitching and street loyalty for years. When 699 in cooperation with federal authorities became public, Boosie was relentless. He made it a cornerstone of his public persona, the idea that you don't cooperate, you don't fold, and you definitely don't keep winning in hip-hop if you do. The current explosion between Kodak and Boosie stemmed from grievances dating back to 2023, when Boosie criticized Kodak's professional association with Tekashi 6ix9ine. In hip-hop's unforgiving moral landscape, collaborating with someone widely considered an informant represents an unforgivable transgression. That initial criticism created lasting animosity, with each rapper nursing grudges that have now manifested in increasingly personal attacks. So, Kodak's beef with Boosie has an origin story, and that origin story matters because it reframes everything. Kodak isn't going after Boosie purely on principle. He's also settling old scores. Boosie dragged Kodak for working with 6ix9ine. Now, Kodak wants Boosie to apply that same energy to Young Thug. When Boosie doesn't, Kodak frames it as hypocrisy. The Florida MC thinks the Baton Rouge rapper isn't holding Thugger accountable, which is hypocritical given Boosie's past slandering of folks like 6ix9ine for similar accusations. The problem is that framing reveals something about Kodak positioning, too. He's not going after Thug directly at first. He's going after people he thinks should be going after Thug. That's a specific type of move. It's indirect, it's using proxies, and it eventually pulls the receipts out of the drawer. It wasn't a great look for Kodak, who just hour before had hopped online trying to check Boosie for staying quiet about Thug's situation. He wrote on Instagram asking where Boosie was, calling him the former spokesman for all the street code talk who now had nothing to say. And then came the call, the Mariah call, the one that shifted everything from Kodak being the guy pointing the finger to Kodak being the guy with a lot to answer for himself. The thing about leaked audio is that it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about timing. It doesn't care that you just went on Instagram to position yourself as a moral conscience of hip-hop. It doesn't care that you called out someone else's integrity 6 hours earlier. Kodak Black found himself at the center of Young Thug and Mariah, the scientist's ongoing saga, after a leaked phone call revealed his alleged messages to the singer. The call wasn't even about Kodak directly. It was a call between Thug and Mariah, one of many calls from the YSL trial period that had been circulating, but this one had a specific detail that made the internet stop cold. In audio posted on Instagram, Mariah is heard telling Thug that Kodak once reached out to her, saying he was deeply infatuated with her. Mariah read the alleged message aloud and described references to Young Thug's own legal trouble stemming from the YSL RICO case. She told Young Thug she turned Kodak's attempt to flirt down and said the Florida rapper had behaved similarly when they first met. So, Kodak wasn't just sliding into a woman's DMs. He was sliding into Young Thug's girlfriend's DMs while Thug was in jail, while Thug was fighting a RICO case, and in the message, he apparently referenced Thug's incarceration, which reads less like sympathy and more like opportunity. The leaked audio finds Mariah sharing with her man that she felt the need to tell him everything, and goes on to read a message from a rapper who slid into her DMs. While the message starts off with well wishes for Young Thug, the sender then pivots into suggesting she should consider seeing him while the artist is locked up. That pivot, that's a detail, because the well wishes for Thug at the top of the message are almost worse than if he'd just been straightforwardly disrespectful. It creates this pretense of solidarity. I'm thinking about your man. How he doing in there? And then in the same breath, uses Thug's locked up status as a reason why Mariah should see him. That's not clumsy flirting. That's calculated. Mariah explained on the call that she turned Kodak down. She also noted that his approach was nothing new to her, claiming he acted the same way from the very first time they met. Thug's reaction was mostly laughter as she read the message, brushing it aside rather than taking it seriously. The internet did not brush it aside. The internet has a very specific way of processing moments like this. It doesn't contextualize. It doesn't debate. It compresses everything into a single devastating frame. And the frame that emerged from the Mariah call was pretty simple. Kodak Black spent the better part of a morning calling out people who weren't holding Young Thug accountable. And then it came out that he was sliding into Young Thug's girl while Thug was sitting in a cell. The rap game was already in chaos with Young Thug's jail tapes, further dividing the culture. But Kodak managed to expose himself as fans debated loyalties, street codes, and who's really standing on business. Kodak managed to expose himself in the worst way after attempting to drag Boosie into a social media war over snitching and loyalty. Leaked audio showed he was the one not keeping it real. That's the story the internet ran with. And here's the thing. Even when Thug himself laughed it off on the call, the public wasn't going to let it go that easily because the symbolism of it goes beyond the specific flirtatious message. It touches something deeper about loyalty, about what men owe each other when one of them is down, about who you trust in this industry, and whether that trust is ever actually mutual. Thug had just publicly offered Kodak a blank check. That happened first. The image was of a man post-prison, post-RICO, extending his hand to another rapper in the spirit of collaboration. And then, retroactively, the world finds out that while Thug was in jail, Kodak was in his girl's inbox. The most ironic part of all this is how Kodak allegedly flirted with Young Thug's girlfriend while he was in jail. In a leaked jail call, Mariah told Thug that Kodak sent her a message saying he was deeply infatuated with her. She rejected his advances and said the dynamic had been like that since they first met. The timing of all of it coming out, the offer, the rejection, the call, the Boosie drama, all of it landing in the same news cycle, made for one of those rare moments where every element of a story compounds into something bigger than its individual parts. Now, let's give some space to Mariah, the scientist in this, because she's not a passive character here. She's a person who told Thug. She chose to tell him on a recorded jail call, and she read the message out loud. While this call revealed the previous leaked calls from Young Thug showed just the opposite, as he admitted to cheating on the songstress at least 2 times on recorded audio. This includes admitting to sleeping with another woman the day before his RICO arrest and confessing that he had sex with a corrections officer while behind bars. So, the relationship was not clean, not simple. Mariah was loyal enough to reject Kodak and loyal enough to tell Thug about it. But she was doing that while being in a relationship with a man who had cheated on her repeatedly. By his own admission on tape, the leak was the latest twist in a series of phone call scandals involving Thug and Mariah. Earlier calls had shown the Atlanta rapper admitting to being unfaithful, which created major cracks in their relationship. In response to the strain, Thug offered a public apology to Mariah, writing that he was wrong and sorry for what he put her through, that she deserved better from him, and that he would do anything to make it work. That apology tells you something about where Thug's head was at when all of this was breaking. His trying to hold his relationship together with one hand, trying to rebuild YSL with the other hand, trying to manage his public reputation with a third hand he doesn't even have. And right in the middle of all of that, the Kodak story drops. Thug also issued an apology to his peers during this period, writing that to everyone involved in the situation he was sorry. It was happening and hoped they could forgive him. The fact that both apologies happened in the same stretch of time, to Mariah and to his broader industry peers, says everything about how compressed and overwhelming this moment was. His not managing one fire, his managing an entire field of them. And Kodak Black, whether intentionally or not, was a match for at least one of them. The social media response was loud and immediate. Fans pulled up the timeline. Kodak goes on Instagram calling out Boosie for staying silent on Young Thug. Young Thug had publicly offered Kodak a deal, and Mariah's call drops, showing Kodak tried to step to Thug's girl while he was locked up. The internet's verdict was swift. Kodak had no business calling out anybody's loyalty. It was a classic example of a rapper speaking before being acknowledged, and in turn bringing negative attention upon themselves. And in Kodak's case, it was seemingly a signature at this point. There's an undercurrent of hypocrisy in the conversation. Fans were quick to clown Gunna, but when the same energy was directed at Thug, many didn't want to accept it. Loyalty, it seems, is selective when it's your favorite artist in the hot seat. Kodak was pointing at something real. He just happened to be the least credible person in that moment to be pointing at it. Boosie's response, though, was its own kind of revealing. He didn't deny that Kodak had a point about the selective outrage. He didn't engage with the substance of Kodak's argument at all. Instead, he came back with personal shots about Kodak's career trajectory, about his personal choices, about what Boosie saw as a man spiraling. He said he'd speak when the bag cleared, then dragged Kodak for his declining career and his drug use, saying he was going to be known as a drug addict before his talents. That's not a rebuttal to an argument about hip-hop accountability. That's a targeted personal attack from a man who knows exactly where to aim. And Boosie knows Kodak. They've been in each other's orbit for years. He knows which words land heaviest. Boosie's aggressive response gains context when you consider his own legal predicament, having pleaded guilty to federal firearms charges stemming from a June 2023 arrest. He faced potentially 2 years in federal prison plus supervised release. That looming reality doesn't make him less willing to fight. If anything, it makes him more volatile, more willing to burn things down publicly, because he's already looking at consequences he can't avoid. The beef between Kodak and Boosie is almost a sideshow to the Thug story, but it's not a disconnected one. Every element of it reflects the same central tension. Who gets to hold people accountable in hip-hop, and what disqualifies you from doing so? Neither artist showed any inclination toward de-escalation, suggesting the feud would continue playing out publicly. Boosie's suggestion that Kodak seek professional help indicated he viewed it as more than temporary beef, framing it as genuine concern for Piz's well-being. The hip-hop community watched these developments with a mixture of entertainment and unease, recognizing that such conflicts often have real-world consequences extending beyond social media dramatics. Real-world consequences. That phrase matters, because the story doesn't end with a few tweets and a clapback Instagram. The ripple from all of this, the deal rejected, the calls leaked, the accountability arguments, the personal shots, those ripples keep moving outward. To really understand what Kodak's rejection of the YSL deal meant, you have to understand what YSL actually is and what it's been through. Because saying no to signing with YSL in mid-2025 isn't the same as saying no to signing with YSL in 2020. The label's history, the trial, the plea deals, the aftermath, All of that is baked into the brand now, whether Thug wants it to be or not. YSL Records, Young Stoner Life Records, is an American record label based in Atlanta, Georgia, founded in 2016 by Young Thug. The label is an imprint of 300 Entertainment. At its peak, it was one of the most important labels in Atlanta. The roster read like a greatest hits of a certain era of trap music. The label was embroiled in a major criminal trial from 2022 to 2024, with Young Thug, Gunna, and other YSL members arrested and charged with racketeering and various gang-related crimes in violation of Georgia's RICO Act. Authorities allege that YSL Records was a street gang, and that allegation, regardless of what the final legal outcome says about guilt or innocence, does something to a brand. It embeds itself. It becomes part of the association. When people hear YSL Records now, they don't just think Jeffrey, they think RICO. They think 28 defendants. They think years in Fulton County Jail. They think the leaked calls. They think Gunna. They think all of it. Young Thug avoided convictions on the most serious RICO charges, but faced lesser convictions, leaving the prosecution with a partial victory. The case's conclusion sparked relief among supporters, but left a lasting impression on the legal system. Partial victory for the prosecution, partial freedom for Thug, and a label that's now trying to be rebuilt under the shadow of all of that. That's what Kodak was being asked to walk into. And as a man who had just shed his own label relationship to gain full independence, the proposition of signing anywhere, let alone to a label with that specific history, was always going to be a hard sell. But let's dig into Kodak's own history for a second, because context about who he is makes his rejection of Thug's deal even sharper. This isn't a man with a clean, uncomplicated past who's sitting in judgment from some pristine position. Kodak Black has been arrested, convicted, pardoned, controversial, beloved, and dragged, sometimes all in the same calendar year. Kodak had been through his fair share of ups and downs in his career, and his album Kodak The Blessing was his final one with Capitol Records, which means he became fully independent. That independence was earned through a career that's been as turbulent as it's been creatively prolific. He knows what it costs to be under a label structure when things go sideways. He knows what it costs to have your professional life tangled with legal situations and public controversies. A lot of people were happy for him, hoping it would mean even more new music than usual. Others pointed to his newfound control of business and industry dealings on his own terms, while some continued to express worry about unrelated legal trouble. That last part, the unrelated legal trouble, is a quiet but important footnote. Kodak's freedom in one area doesn't mean everything's clean. But the point is he fought to get to a place of independence. He fought for the right to make his own choices about his career. And the first test of that independence was Young Thug offering him the world to sign. He said no, and then he went after the people he felt weren't being consistent about the standards they claimed to live by. And then the Mariah call dropped, and then Boosie responded, and then the full picture of this moment crystallized into something that nobody, not Kodak, not Thug, not Boosie, not the internet fully controlled. Once the snitch label sticks in hip-hop, it's nearly impossible to shake. Look at Gunna, once Thug's closest collaborator, now ridiculed online daily with the same accusations. The irony is that Thug was rumored to have cut ties with Gunna over snitching, and now is facing similar smoke himself. The wheel keeps spinning. The man who cut off his closest friend over a plea deal now finds himself defending against the same accusations, and the man who tried to sign him as a symbol of his comeback got exposed for a move he made while his potential signee was behind bars. The snitching conversation around Young Thug was not a simple one, and it's important to be fair about that. Resurfaced interrogation audio allegedly showed Young Thug snitching on a YSL affiliate, reigniting debate about loyalty, street rules, and the rapper's silence since release. Fans were divided as Thug denied all claims. Thug himself was adamant that the allegations were false. He took to Twitter to clap back, posting legal motions as receipts. He claimed detectives lied when they said he made a statement in the back of a police car, insisting it never happened. The energy behind his denial shows just how much this matters, not just his image, but to his career. Once that snitch label sticks in hip-hop, it's nearly impossible to shake. And Kodak's public behavior, calling out Boosie, seemingly distancing himself from the whole situation, rejecting the deal, reads to many observers as Kodak essentially signaling that he believed the allegations had merit. Not with words necessarily, but with actions. with who he chose to be vocal about, with what deal he chose to turn down, with what side of the conversation he placed himself on. Culturally, this moment shines a light on a bigger issue in hip-hop: the unrealistic expectations we place on rappers to uphold street codes while navigating a billion-dollar music industry. At the end of the day, many of these artists are businessmen, not gangsters, but the persona they sell to fans demands that they maintain the image of being real. Once that image is compromised, so is their career. That's the trap that every person in this story is caught in. Young Thug built his entire brand on a certain kind of energy. Kodak Black built his on a certain kind of rawness. Boosie built his on being the loudest voice in the room about the code. And now all three of them are standing in a moment where the code they've each championed is being held up against their own behavior, and none of them comes out of it perfectly clean. Every story like this is an aftermath, not a clean resolution. Hip-hop beefs rarely have those, but a settling, a moment where the noise starts to quiet down, and what's left is a permanent shift in how people see everybody involved. For Young Thug, that shift had been happening in slow motion for a while. The criticism got so intense that Thug attempted to clear the air with a 3.5-hour interview, easily one of the longest of his career on the podcast Perspectives with Bank. 3.5 hours. That's not a man doing a press run for an album. That's a man trying to reconstruct his reputation from scratch, brick by brick, in real time, in front of an audience. Young Thug came to tears during the interview while discussing his disappointment with Gunna. The Atlanta rapper basically laughed the whole thing off when Mariah told him, with the R&B singer also claiming that Kodak had been like that since they first met. Maybe Thugger forgot about the Kodak incident, or maybe he'd already put it behind them. Either way, it's curious to think about this being the context for that deal offer. That word curious is doing a lot of work, because curious is exactly what this whole situation is. It's curious that Thug extended such an open public offer to a man who had made a move on his partner. It's curious that Kodak accepted that goodwill and then used the same news cycle to publicly question the integrity of people associated with Thug. It's curious that the Mariah call dropped at the exact moment when Kodak had positioned himself as hip-hop's moral arbiter. None of it was planned. All of it was simultaneous, and the result was a mess that nobody walked away from cleanly. What does the YSL story look like from here? The label is still alive. Thug is still building. After losing 9 Vicious, Thug went on to focus more on an Atlanta-based collective of rising underground artists, eventually signing Atlanta rappers Tezzers and Diamond, who went on to release their debut studio album under the label. His not stopping, his rebuilding the way someone builds when they've lost a lot, carefully, methodically, with an eye toward long-term stability rather than short-term splashes. The blank check offer to Kodak was a short-term splash move. It didn't land, but the quieter work of building a new roster, that's still happening. As of 2026, the current YSL roster includes Thug himself, Strick, T-Shine, Young K.O., Tezzers, Diamond, and 1300 Saint. Several artists including Drake, Future, Lil Uzi Vert, Playboi Carti, and Lil Baby have expressed allegiance to YSL, but are not contractual signed. That list, artists who are aligned but not contractual bound, is actually telling. It suggests that Thug's relationships still carry weight in the industry, even post-Rico. People are still willing to be associated with the brand, just maybe not in a formal, legally binding way, which, given everything, is probably the smartest position anyone can take right now. And Kodak Black stays independent. He stays loud. He stays exactly who he is, a man whose instincts are as sharp as his judgment is questionable, who can see real things clearly, and then undermine them with his own behavior. He didn't need YSL. He probably never did. The question was always whether YSL needed him and whether the cost of what that relationship would have looked like given everything underneath it would have been worth it for either side. Young Thug had been at the center of controversies recordings of his jailhouse calls made while he was incarcerated during the YSL trial leaked online. In those calls is heard, speaking on his frustrations with everyone from Kendrick Lamar to Drake, and even Andre 3000. The calls made him human, raw, unfiltered, contradictory, petty in some moments and profound in others. They made him fallible. They made him someone the internet could take apart, but take him apart and put him back together. And what you still have is one of the most influential figures in the last decade of Atlanta music. A man who built a label that shaped the sound of an era whose legal ordeal became a referendum on how the system treats black artists who rap about the streets they came from. The case highlighted the risk of using broad laws like RICO to prosecute artists, blurring the line between artistic freedom and criminal intent. Critics warn that such cases could chill free expression, especially in marginalized communities where hip-hop is a dominant cultural voice. That's bigger than the Kodak beef. That's bigger than the Boosie argument. That's bigger than the Mariah call. The YSL case set a precedent about how rap lyrics can be used as evidence about how a record label can be reframed as a criminal enterprise that doesn't go away because the trial ended. While the verdict may mark the end of this chapter for Young Thug, its broader implications will resonate for years. The case serves as a reminder of the justice system's responsibility to strike a balance between prosecuting crime and safeguarding constitutional rights. Thug carries all of that. The legal precedent, the personal betrayals, the leaked calls, the public humiliation, the rebuilding.